manuscripts because they relate to the illuminated manuscripts that bring me with the old monks to try to retain information. I'm trying to retain this information, the story of history, which is so idiotic.
You could get them both together while you're doing that.
Now, Nina, what do you want done with this? You like this?
Yeah. Maybe you could put this little sunset over there, or the Nazi soldiers.
Which one do you want?
What's the one under here? That's too long, right?
In December 2002, the curator Nina Felshen from the Artist Network of Refuse and Resist interviewed the painter Arnold Mesches in his New York City studio. The Artist Network was eager to interview Arnold for our Inside the Culture of Resistance series because he is one of those rare artists who has solved the problem of making art which speaks profoundly about the social upheavals of our time from the point of view of changing the world, and he's done it in a way that is beautiful and entirely unexpected. Plus, how many artists have survived 27 years of FBI surveillance and succeeded in making great art out of the experience?
I made art because I had to make statements. I was a social artist from day one. I had things I wanted to say, and I had to find a way to do it my own way. An artist is whoever they are. By that I mean you are who you are by virtue of what you've lived, what your philosophy is, and all of those things. It's a painting of my mother, the last one that I did of her. And it was kind of an ode to Rembrandt for me. This is Rembrandt's dark into dark, allowing the center whites to go like that. And I really wanted to try it. That's a drawing that became this painting of my father sleeping on Sundays. My mother would get all dressed up, want to go to the park, and he's sound asleep, worn out from the week, This is my father and me. During the Depression, he couldn't find a job, so he bought and sold old gold. And this is me helping him out in the snow, again without any overcoat,
I'm curious, as I am with a lot of people who are artists, about when you kind of knew you were an artist, how that sort of came to you, what you had been doing up until that point.
I mean, a fine artist.
A fine artist, yeah.
It was late. I was 27 already, and because I came out of the Big Depression, and you don't think about becoming a fine artist when you're trying to earn a living and you're a poor kid. So I went to Buffalo Technical High School, and I studied to be an advertising designer, and then I got a scholarship in Los Angeles, the Art Center School. And then about 2.5 years into that, my uncle, who always wanted to be a painter, died at an early age of a heart attack. And I thought, well, he was always going to be an artist. And I figured, if I want to be an artist, better I shouldn't wait till I'm ready to drop dead of a heart attack. And I gave up my scholarship and decided to become a painter. And thinking that I would benefit from any kind of art, I made a portfolio up and got a job in the movie industry doing set illustrations. And of course it had nothing to do with painting. But what interestingly enough happened is Hollywood went on strike. And I got involved in the picket lines and politically active, and it became a political education. I was no longer, of course, in the movie industry because the strike went on for almost a year. And you can imagine the kind of education one gets walking a picket line and going to jail with 800 other people, things of that kind. You get an education. And the education started to give me some clues about the fact that I really wanted to express my views of the world. It begins at the beginning. My father used to say evil and justice. I began to see evil and justice in a different way. And that picket line was very important, and so were the discussions and relating to all the the people had to do with social commentary in the world, like Daumier, like Goya, people that I suddenly became aware of. I drove a lunch truck in order to earn a living and feed my kids. Since I didn't really care about the lunch truck, I mean, I would let them take things from this, you know, and make their own change, and I'm on the floor in my sketch pad, drawing them, drinking and playing craps and talking to each other, you know. So and those became some of my early paintings, the lunch truck series.
Was there a community of artists in LA that you worked with and were friendly with?
I organized a group of artists. We had people we called on for everything: photographers, designers, sign painters, etc., etc. It was called the Graphic Arts Workshop. It was fashioned after the Graphic Arts Workshop in Mexico called the Gráfica Popular. When I was in Mexico and I gave a lecture there, I realized that's what I was going to do in LA. Mm-hmm. And there were people would meet in my studio in Hollywood. And we organized things for trade unions, for everything, you know, for every progressive organization and every campaign we were active.
I think I first came to your studio in about 1988 when I was working on this show called Unknown Secrets: Art in the Rosenberg Era. Can you tell us a little bit about that time, what you were doing at that time in relation to the Rosenberg trial and execution?
Well, when I read their lives, I found out that their background and my background were very similar, that they had come from an Orthodox Jewish family, that they broke from it eventually, became liberal progressives, and so their traditional background was very much the same as mine. So I took and made a family background series of paintings based on my family, and then moved it into some of the imagery about their execution and their burial and the funeral and things of that kind. There were 25 or 30 paintings done at that time on the Rosenberg. I really call it family background. And that occupied, I don't know, maybe a good year and a half of time. Much of those paintings were stolen in the robbery in 1956. When I finished the Rosenberg series, I figured out the Renaissance had the Christ story, and what was the big story of my life was the Second World War. So I did these drawings of the Holocaust, and there were about 85 of these drawings. This was in the Metropolitan Museum in '57. It's called they're survivors. Metamorphosis. It turns out that there were birds in the concentration camps eating the bones by the hundreds. And so I used this pigeon and one of the corpses as an image. It's called Metamorphosis. Rape. The phoenix bird. Remember, the phoenix bird rises every 500 years out of the ashes of the dead.
As a curator who deals a lot with art that addresses political, cultural, social issues, I know it's very hard to find artists whose work is both addressing these issues in a framework that's also aesthetic. In other words, is both communicates a message, but also communicates it through formal means. And I think you do that very, very successfully. And I'm curious to know what you think of art. I think there's a range of what's considered political art. Some is more didactic, some is much more poetic, and I'm just curious, how do you think about your method in terms of communicating to viewers, reaching an audience?
I think there are two different things. One, when I was making leaflets, they had nothing to do with making art. Mm-hmm. That was an ad hoc, immediate kind of thing, and that's the purpose that they served. When you're making art, you have to deal with more than ad hoc issues, and you can't simply be overt, because life is not that way. Life is complex. Life is is energetic. Life has various problems. And you have to take all that stuff into consideration. You have to take into consideration not just the political, but the social and the emotional and the psychological and so on. One of the things that I have found myself moving more and more toward after the war images and the more overt things was to make an art form that had more lasting value, that was aesthetically beautiful, not just that it had a subject matter, but that subject matter is only the catalyst for content. And content is much more important in art than is subject matter.
How do you define content?
Content has to do with feeling. It has to do with the thing that rises above subject matter and that has more lasting quality to it. For example, Katie Colwitz did a series of lithographs based on the marchers, the Weavers' March, and they were imprisoned. So she's doing a lithograph and she wants to show the imprisonment of these people. Well, it's one thing to show them. It's another thing, how do you make them conceptually imprisoned? So she found a way to imprison them within the prison of a picture plane, so that the form and the content had to go together.
So how does metaphor and fit into the way you work?
But that's what it's all about.
Yeah.
As you know, a thing means something else, and that is not necessarily what it means, but what it brings forth in so many other ways.
Yeah.
And if you're going to speak to people, you can't speak to them and hit them over the head. They have to bring their experience into the thing, and that you learn from Bertolt Brecht, when he brought the audience into the thing. And all of these things were lessons in my upbringing and learning how to be an artist.
By using metaphor and a kind of poetry that evokes certain kinds of things, you're giving the viewer a space, really. Maybe some people live through a certain period and it brings up memories, which I think is a very kind of generous way to work, and also a way that's very inviting. And there's also, I think, a fair amount of humor in your work, which becomes kind of subversive in a way, because it's usually you're making fun of, in effect, the humor kind of brings out your position.
You got to make art first, and if it becomes art, then the subject matter becomes content, and it's with the form and the content that this then becomes this thing that lasts through history, and doesn't just be like another piece of paper, like yesterday's newspaper. And that I find in all the great social painters that I've ever looked at, Daumier or Goya or Max Beckmann or Katie Colwitz or any of them, they made great art. Katie Colwitz's etchings and lithographs rank with Rembrandt. That's how fantastic they are as art. And then you say, God, look at what she's saying with this fantastic art.
You've never really been part of a movement per se, even in the sort of the more recent decades when there have been certain kinds of art that's been critically ascendant. You've kind of stuck to what you do, but I think you've been doing things a little bit differently in terms of color, the kind of collaging of images. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Well, the most important thing is that life goes on and life changes. And in the process, well, your art changes unless you get stayed and stuck in a rut, when I'm not one of those people who can stay in a same place. When I finish a series, I move on to something else, and very often the form itself changes according to what it is that I'm trying to say. The use of a collage kind of an imagery had to do with this concept of disparate imagery taking on a gestalt at some point, so that things came from different parts of life, whether they be history or personal, and in coming together they make a third statement, which it's part of what I've been trying to think about for some time. It really came from Bruegel, who would always have something happening over here when something was happening over here at the same moment in time, and that's pretty much where those paintings are about. Then I sent away for my FBI files, and I found out that they were following me from October 5th of 1945 for 27 years, that they followed me night and day, that there were hundreds and hundreds of informers and agents and people of that kind who knew every step I took and every peace rally I went on and every petition I signed, and every time my children were born, they knew their weight in the hospital and the day they were born. They knew who was screwing me. They knew who was this. They knew who was that. They were doing everything. For why, I have no idea, because I was not that important. And why would they go after an artist?
What made you actually go through the Freedom of Information Act to request your files?
Two things. One, that I had seen other people's files, and you know, they take, some secretary takes and blacks out what they don't want you to read, and they look absolutely aesthetically beautiful. I mean, there were pages, and I think somewhere or other that kind of aesthetic randomness I'm going to make use of. And second of all, is my studio was robbed in 1956, and I wanted to know if they knew anything about that robbery. So I sent away for them a few years ago with both of those things in mind, knowing that somewhere along the line I was going to finish the Enemy series and finish the Echo series, and I needed something else. You know, always looking for new material. And this was a natural, because it obviously was going to be about the history of my time, and I knew they were following me. I knew there must be a record of some kind, or some files of some kind. What I didn't know was the extent that they were following me, nor did I realize how much they would send. I mean, they sent a pile of pages like that. Almost 800 pages. The painting in here was the first thing I did on the series. And I did it, remember, I was doing all these big collages, and I figured, I'll make another collage of the FBI stuff. And I like the painting, it's a nice painting, but it doesn't do what they had to do. They had to be intimate. Because when I got this package like this, and I sat down at my drawing table, and I'm going like this, there was an intimacy to them that I wanted to get. That's why I went to this scale. They followed me, and hundreds of thousands of people all over. I mean, every time I sneezed, they reported it. And they reported it in many ways. They reported it by special agents, which are FBI agents. They had special paid informers who weekly sent reports in on people and were paid weekly by the government. You and I paid their tax, with our taxes. And there were people who were simply, you know, like the mailman or the next door neighbor, who would send in reports because they were patriotic. Does this sound familiar? But that went on all the time. One of the complainants, a neighbor, for example, complained that I was wearing a communist uniform. What's a communist uniform? I was wearing rolled up blue jeans, paint spattered, with a blue jean jacket and a t-shirt. And that in those days was a communist uniform. Everything under the sun was told about me in terms of everything I did. Everything I did. And the people who were reporting on me were shocking, and I was able to ascertain some of this. A next door neighbor whose stroller, we gave them our baby stroller. We would exchange baby clothes with them. We would babysit. They were reporting, and they were going through my garbage to pick out the license numbers of the people on the street, you know. I mean, the neighbors have license numbers, right? It was on and on and on. A former lover of mine who was a school teacher became an informer and weekly reports on me. A friend of mine who I trusted, you know, said one time, one evening, we were all sitting around with our sketch pads close by, and he says, "Oh, let's make sketches of each other, you know, just for the hell of it." So sure, we made sketches of each other. Well, in my files, some pages before the sketch appears in my files, is a request from the FBI to this guy. Would he make a sketch of me? Well, that was a great way to make a sketch, and the sketch is in my file. A student who turns out to be an FBI agent literally comes to class with a necktie on, in you know, shirt and necktie, in hot August, and he's taking necktie camera pictures of me, which show up in my file. These are a historical document. They're not just my document, they're a document of the world that I lived in. and they happen to be about me and my friends and things like that. I really wanted to find out whether the FBI had anything to do with the robbery. Do I know that they had anything to do with the robbery? Well, no, they didn't say they did, but 3 months prior to August 6th of 1956 and 3 months after that date, there were no pages in my files. So I assume that they were kept out for some reason. So I'm assuming that the FBI had something to do with the robbery. But look at this, I'm in pretty good company. You know, Linus Pauling, the Unitarian Fellowship, you know, and Arnold Mesches, you know, not bad. Someone said the other day, they looked at this and said, what did they send you that for? There's nothing on it. So I said, they sent it because it's beautiful. You know, look how beautiful this page is. And of course, this I found in a magazine on the 50s. I don't know who she is even. But this is from a photograph I took on a picket line where these neo-Nazis in LA were marching across the streets from our demonstration on peace. And these are real things, an LA Nazi party and things like that. They were in full uniform with them, walking like this, as you can see. And then I took other things, this being, of course, these are little paintings. And believe me, for me to do little paintings is like people getting their teeth pulled, because you know, I'm one of these people, and I'm sitting there like, but it was, you know, the fun thing is that when I blow these up, on a, you know, and they have the same brushstroke as my big paintings. This is a transfer of 4 different ads at the time. Obviously Winston and Playboy and Cutty Sark. And it's a wonderful way of doing this kind of double thing where you could, you know, you use it to put, you know, an FBI page behind it or anything else. That is another kind of transfer that's literally the same thing on a piece of paper. And during a period of time I was writing a novel, and that's one of the pages out of my, you know, my writing, before I had a computer, you know. I put everything I've known all my life into the making of those things. And the choosing, the editing, the actual making of it has been an attempt to make art as to what I know art to be. Mm-hmm. And once I got the idea of the thing, which is really what is important, then making it was because I could call on my ears to make it. I've tried for many, many years to make pertinent statements for today. But this is kind of a summation of things, right. And it happens at a certain historical time for this country and for the world.
I think that for a lot of people who read the mainstream media today, they're not going to really understand the impact of Homeland Security Act or you know, the USA Patriot Act. Yeah. But when something that personal hits you, it's suddenly like it's hitting home.
In the illuminated manuscripts, what the old monks did was to try to retain information. And I'm trying to retain this information, this story of history, this waste of time and energy, the same way that wars are a waste of time and energy. And it's an exposure of that, and it's done in such a way that people are enjoying looking at them because they're visually exciting.
I also think of illuminated manuscripts today as objects that are very carefully presented with very low light levels, and just because they can deteriorate. And there's a certain irony in the fact that you're exposing information, you're kind of letting there be light on this period of history.
That's great, I love that, that's very poetic. I am who I am. I believe in pointing out through history the evils and the ridiculousness of what has happened to the world, and that's a historical thing, and it goes from one century to the next, nightmare after nightmare, war after war. So I'm writing, you know, a picket sign saying "No more war." Ha! I mean, that will never happen in my lifetime. But I keep fighting for it. I've gotten interviews now in Sweden and in Brussels and in the Canadian NPR and all over hell and gone, in Paris or the Associated Press, and everybody asks the same question. What do you think about the Patriot Act, and do you think America is going crazy? And I know you don't want to use, the people don't want to use the word fascism anymore. It's a reaction. I don't care. It is a fascist government, you know, and that's what we're facing. And we're going to see civil rights eroded like we've never seen before. You're going to see people stopped from going in airplanes. And it's already happening. Yeah. You're going to see people you're going to see things that we've never even thought about before. Look, I remember friends of mine going to jail. The Hollywood 10, I helped march them we marched with them, and I did all the banners, okay, when they went to jail with the demonstration. I remember all of that. I remember friends of mine losing jobs. I remember when John Garfield dropped dead. of a heart attack. Okay? This went on, and it's going to go on again. And I don't know, I don't know what the hell, you know, is there anything to be stopping? Yes, we're going to stop it, but it's going to be a hell of a job. Dalton Trumbo wrote a wonderful essay called The Time of the Toad, in which he tries to explore. It's a magnificent piece of writing. He tries to explore at a time when we were in the midst of reaction, how you've got to find a way to make art. When the Jews were in the pipes underneath in Warsaw, they were putting out a mimeograph newspaper with criticisms of books, okay? Talking about this book and the, you know, literally literary criticisms with little cartoons and little drawings, okay? In other words, the human spirit and the quest for art and the quest for human interchange goes on at every level, and it will and it can. You fight like hell as an artist to become whole and not be part this and part that, and you know, somewhere you're going to find a kernel from which you then blossom, you know, and that's how you make your poetry, and that's how you make your art. The reason that I've been able to do a lot of these things is because I have stuck to my guns as far as being, you know, building myself as an artist, and I think that in truth, from that standpoint, you know, I'm still an emerging artist. I'm still learning and changing and lecturing and thinking, and I got a lot to do yet, you know. So